Welcome, everybody, to the Agronomist on this Monday night. Thanks a lot for tuning in and being a part of the show. We greatly appreciate it. We're having a lot of fun with these Agronomist shows. Real Ag Prime Time on Monday nights. And we got another great one for you here today, a great panel. If you want to participate in tonight's show, that's what makes this show so special. We are live. We're not recording this, patching it together, making it look exactly perfect for you. We are live streaming on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, or on realagriculture.com/live. If you want to participate in tonight's program, like I said, just enter your comment, your question in the box, whether you're watching on any of those social platforms, and we'll get to as many of those questions as we possibly can. For all you CCAs, you agronomists out there, stop by realagriculture.com in the morning at realagriculture.com/agronomists, and you can qualify for your CCA credits there. And while you're there, sign up for the agronomist email. That way we prompt you and say, hey, it's time to get your credits. So make sure that you do that. Yeah. And Viren, you are right. That's a good question to ask. This is what my Monday night has come to. Exactly right, my friend. And I appreciate you tuning in like you do every Monday. Okay, let's get to our panel here tonight. We got a great one, lots of fun, a very insightful gang. Dr. Brian Beres out of AAFC Lethbridge. How are you doing, Brian?
Good. How about you, Shaun?
Doing fantastic. And, of course, also in Lethbridge. Too bad we couldn't get together and do this in the studio. There will be a time where we will be able to do that, I hope, pretty soon, man.
Oh, you could have at least dropped a six-pack off on my doorstep before you went back to.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, no kidding. Also joining us here tonight is Peter Johnson. Hey, Pete, how are you?
I'm absolutely awesome, Shaun. This is one of my favorite topics. We're going to have an absolute blast tonight. And hey, the days are getting longer. You know, it's a little bit by little bit. Spring is going to happen. We're going to get through and you know, the sun will rise tomorrow and the crop will get planted this spring. Things are looking up.
The question is, when should we try to plant that crop? And about a week ago, I was looking for agronomist clips. Last week, we talked about getting your soybean crop off to the right start. And as I was kind of going through all those clips, I was just amazed at, one, the library that we have of agronomic content at realagriculture.com. But the other thing that I stumbled across a video that we had done with Brian a little while ago, a couple years ago, talking about this ultra early seeding. And he's done a lot of research on this topic. Now, there's early seeding, and then there's ultra early. Brian, how do you define ultra early?
Well, it was a phrase and concept we coined just as a strategy alternative to the conventional thinking around planting in the context of calendar dates. So, and so when we decided on ultra early, it was just basically sort of throwing some conventional wisdom out the window and just starting at 0 degrees Celsius. What happens to wheat if we do that with respect to planting at that time? Or they're using that as the trigger, I guess. So yeah. Ultra early and then soil temperature triggers were sort of the catchphrases we went with.
And we're going to play a clip here in a second here, but didn't this whole thing start in some conversations with some farmers in Montana, or you're driving through Montana? Is that correct?
Yeah, it was weird. I was going down for a sawfly meeting actually at the end of March, like about 9 years ago. And it wasn't a year that, at least so far, the way it's shaping up, a lot different than this year. And guys were out in the field prepping. I don't know that I saw any drills, but they were out there, and I was like, there's nobody out there. And things aren't any different in southern Alberta. So maybe there's an opportunity to explore something different to what we're currently doing.
And Pete, I think with some of the dry weather we're seeing on the prairies, as just an example, this is the kind of year where people really do think about, man, I got to get a head start. I don't have a lot to work with. I got to get out there as early as I can.
Yeah, absolutely. And as they should, because you don't want to miss any of that early moisture in Western Canada. Here in Ontario, we've had an incredibly mild winter, almost no snow cover. People are talking about how little ice is on the Great Lakes, the least ice in I forget how many years. And of course, immediately everybody's getting anxious. They think they're going to chew those wheels. But yeah, unfortunately, ice on the Great Lakes and when we actually get into the field don't relate at all, because it can rain here in Ontario. And then it doesn't matter whether it's warm, cold, or indifferent. It's just simply too wet. But no, the potential, and Shaun, back with one of the Real Ag those seminar series that you ran through March, and I was in Lethbridge talking about this kind of stuff, and Ernie Tosheter was in the audience there, and it was like the 10th of March. And I said to the crowd, like, what are you doing here? You shouldn't be here. You should be out drilling your wheat in. And he went home and actually did a half a section or whatever, and it really worked for him. So lots of fun thought process from this perspective.
I remember that it was our tech tour series, and it was Dow at the time. Of course, now they're Corteva. But Pete picture this, Brian. Pete gets on the stage, and he's like, "What the hell are any of you even doing here? You should be at home seeding your wheat." And it was just like everyone's looking around the room, like I thought we were supposed to be here. And then I got a phone call from it was a couple weeks later from somebody that was at that meeting. And they said, yeah, I enjoyed Wheat Pete. He was great. I listened to, I took some of his advice and we put some crop in. I'm like, oh, okay, that's good. How many, you're like, a little bit? He's like, 1,600 acres. What? That's Western Canada right there for you. Okay, let's get to the first clip here. It is with Brian, and it was for one of our Wheat School episodes. You can go to wheatschool.com and find great content just like this, brought to you by Syngenta Canada, CNMCs, and Alberta Wheat Commission. Let's watch that first clip, and it'll kind of set the stage for tonight's discussion, all about early seeding, planting, and maybe we'll even talk about some ultra early. Here's Brian Beres, ultra early seeding.
So today we're going to talk seeding, specifically ultra early seeding, and the research you guys are doing on that. So why don't you give us a little bit of a rundown on the research that you're doing here?
Sure. So this concept was inspired by a trip down to Montana in 2012, where at the end of March, I was going down for a wheat stem sawfly meeting, actually. And on the way, as soon as I crossed the border, we would see a lot of farmers. Conditions were conducive to that year, where they were already in the field going. And this was wheat. These were wheat fallow systems, so they were in there with wheat. And I thought, that's a good idea, because I grew up as a farm kid, and I know we've got roots in Fort Macleod and Ready Made, and there have been times for sure where we could go, but we were sort of held to this idea that as long as you're in by May 10th with your cereals, you'd be fine, and that always kind of revolved around insurance purposes. So I thought, what about an ultra early system for wheat, where we could go in and see and understand what are the risks of going real early and deviating away from these calendar date prescriptions, and instead using a prescription based on soil temperature. And so that's what we're out here doing today, is we've set up a series of experiments where we're going to use soil temperature as a trigger to get out and start seeding. And so today we're Matea Pittman and Stephen Simmel. We're out here today checking the soil temperatures. In this study, we start at 0 degrees C, and then at incremental levels 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Those are the triggers and the levels of what we're going to be studying. And we're entering now, I believe, our 4th or 5th year on this.
All right. So over those years, what have you seen as a result of this?
Well, it's actually been quite a surprise. The old recommendations would sort of have you going into conditions once soil temperatures reached a point where you could ensure germination. And so obviously you're not going to have any germination at 0 or 2 per se necessarily. But the risk posed by going in that early is actually minimal to none once you start at 2 degrees. There's some risk at 0, and that's more I think, around not so much the seed interaction with cold soils, but just the implement. If you're going with a knife opener like this and there's still a bit of frost on the ground, you might rip up boulders and not get good seed to soil contact. But from 2 degrees on that, and we're seeing a sweet spot of about 2 degrees to 6 degrees is where we get optimal yields, no risk. And honestly, if we wait until the recommended soil temperatures of say 10 plus degrees to go in and start, you're actually in some cases, some situations, seeing a yield drag.
All right, so how does the research relate to available varieties?
Well, that was the other aspect of this, because we were wanting to understand how do genetics interact with cold soils, with different management tactics. And so we actually teamed up with Dr. Rob Graff, our winter wheat breeder, and he had developed what he called cold tolerant lines. And these are basically just winter wheat lines with the vernalization response removed from it. And his thinking there was he wanted a spring wheat type winter wheat that he could swap traits in and out of, because he doesn't have the luxury of spring wheat breeders to have a winter nursery to multiply seed production. So we used his lines and compared it with conventional. The reality to date, though, is the conventional varieties that we have now in the CWRS class, and we were using Stettler, and we tested it everywhere from down here in Lethbridge, Alberta, all the way up to Dawson Creek, BC, and into Edmonton and parts of Saskatchewan. And the fact is, Stettler did just fine. And so I think that's kind of a credit to the breeders and sort of the environment we have in a short season northern latitude, that they basically are bred and have to adapt to colder climates. And I think we're seeing an artifact of that in this response of a registered CWS variety versus a cold tolerant line.
All right, so you mentioned that you do have this trial running in several different areas. Have you seen the difference in response regionally?
Well, what we're seeing is that, and we have folks up in Dawson Creek who have really bought into the idea that it can work up there. And so it was successful up there. It's basically been successful at every site we've tried, but with the understanding that it's not going to work every year, right? Because you have years where you're just going to end up later, but there's conditions at every site, multiple conditions where we've been able to get in early. And so if we're using that soil temp as a trigger and looking at what we've experienced down here, for example, in year one, the date corresponding to that soil temperature trigger was March 6th. The following year it was February 16th. The year after that was a late year, so we were moving more into April. Today we're at March 27th or something like that, and we're good to go. So it just shows you how unreliable adhering to a calendar date can be, as opposed to letting a soil temperature sort of guide you and indicate when to go.
All right, so you hinted at this a little bit, but what can farmers do with this research? What should they do with it?
Well, they could adopt it right now, and so there's perhaps a tendency of if I went in too early and it was, for example, mid-February, what kind of risk would that pose? And the reality is we've observed no risk to spring wheat. And I think part of the reason of that too, and some of the work we've done on seed treatments, is obviously we're recommending at the same time, you're packaging that seed, that variety, with a dual fungicide insecticide. And the reason for that isn't necessarily to defend against pathogens or soil-borne insects. It's those, for example, compounds in our neonics, which have been getting a bit of a bad rap lately. The reality is that they actually change the metabolic pathways in that wheat plant such that it becomes way more resistant to abiotic stress. So they're going to be able to withstand those cold temperatures, those cold weathers. And a good example is that I believe it was either the March 6th or the February 16th date. I mean, right after we planted, we had a solid month of real harsh conditions. It snowed on those plots, froze solid, and the reality was it was just fine.
Great stuff. Lots of stuff to unpack in there. Brian, a couple things that I wrote down is it's not always going to work every year. And talking about that risk reward scenario, this is maybe, and I think that's an important point. We kind of talked about that leading into the video, is that this is maybe not something you do on all of your acres or your clients' acres.
Well, I think it's knowing your land and knowing your equipment, and understanding how it interacts with various levels of soil conditions that are going to vary like crazy across the field, but also be impacted by environmental conditions. I'll say this, like, if it's, here's an example. Like, so today the guys went out and measured, and we're at 0.4 degrees, and it's January 18th. So, if all the snow was gone, it was dry, you had conditions like they are setting up to be here. It's not about, setting aside a certain amount of acres to do it. It's like, if the opportunity presents itself, take it. Don't be shy about planting all your acres, because we know that there's the risk just doesn't present itself like some people think it will.
Interesting. We got a comment here from Rum Dog, who farms in Wisconsin. He says, last year I planted some... Okay, I'm going to put it up on the screen here while I'm doing this. I should be doing that. Rumdog farms in Wisconsin. He says, last year I planted some year-old beans with a new used 12-row planter just to see if everything worked. It was April 3rd. It took 3 weeks for them to come up. He doesn't say how the yield worked out. Pete, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so first off, I want to know if Brian, if did your guys go out and drill some today? Because that would be an awesome trial just to see.
We're not quite set up to go today. They're gearing up though. I mean, they're shaking their head at me, but the trigger is 0 degrees, so we're almost there.
Yeah, I love it. Actually, here in Ontario, when guys are trying to frost seed, they're always pushing the seed suppliers, because the seed suppliers won't have their seed cleaned and treated and in place, and guys want to get out in the field. So it's really pushing the envelope, really a lot of fun. And Rum Dog, this question, like, good grief, year-old bean seed to begin with. Bean seed loses its vigor like crazy over a year. So you can get away with those things with cereals, but with large seeded crops like lentils or peas or soybeans, they really do lose a lot of vigor. So the fact it came up at all is astounding. And 3 weeks to come up. Yeah. So it was April. I mean, gosh, I'm pretty impressed that they came up that fast and that they came up at all.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, question here from Ray. Hey, Ray, thanks for tuning in, as you always do. Ray says, does your fertility approach change with early seeding? Brian, you first.
Well, everything changes in a way, because it's kind of a novel concept. And so, you're not in a situation to even think about a pre-seed burn down, right? There's no weeds to hit yet. Fertilizer is something that I have a PhD student, Graham Collier, who works with New Farm Chemicals, actually, and he's taken this on as his PhD project. And two critical things he's looking at, in addition to the proof of concept, is fertility, and then switching up fertilizer practices, and what do you have to focus more on a fall system of nutrient management rather than all in at planting or in crop.
Interesting. Pete, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think it does change, but I think it changes because typically you have higher yield potential. So if you have higher yield potential, then you may need to support that yield with a little more nitrogen, a little more sulfur. I really think, phosphorus is 5 times more available at a soil temperature of 25 degrees Celsius than it is at a soil temperature of 5 degrees Celsius. So if we're planting at 0 or at 2 Celsius, then that phosphorus, that seed row phosphorus, becomes really critical. And I think it's always critical. So I'm not sure that I would change my recommendation. But boy, if you're going to do this, I don't think you can get away without, or I think that the benefit, at least, of that starter phosphorus is huge. And I think the other thing that Brian pointed out that you kind of jumped over, Shaun, I'm starting to wonder if we are getting you to be an agronomist here.
Here
or
we
not,
go. Here we go. Yeah.
We're still trying, but weed control, yeah. So actually, the crop becomes more competitive with the spring annual weeds because it gets a jump on them. And we've really seen that. But if you have perennial weeds like dandelions or I don't know, shepherd's purse or winter annuals, those kind of things, then fall weed control becomes really quite critical. So it almost shifts your entire thinking from an agronomic perspective if you're going to try and take advantage.
I like that. So it almost like this process starts in the fall to work towards the ability to really benefit from that really early seed. And what's interesting is, boys, this year has really lined up. You think about the fall of 20, it was completely open. There was lots of time to do a lot of this prep work. So we've really lined ourselves up in a lot of acres to really maybe have the chance to have a really, really large scale experiment here. That's it.
Well, and a lot of,
go ahead, Brian.
I was just going to say a lot of credit goes to growers that did that the last 2 years that really took a chance on our concept. And they phoned me, told me what their conditions were, and I said, go ahead and plant. And they did it. And they're like, there's nobody around me planting. And I said, do it. And, guys like Jay Schultz, man, he did it, and he showed everybody around him that it could be done. And then we're patting ourselves on the back. And then that was the year where we had those crazy late frost events where the wheat got whacked really hard by days as low as -11. And I was like, I'm going to be run out of Canada because of this idea.
Pete feels like that every week. Don't, Brian.
And you know what? It turned out fine. There was a little bit of damage on the top third of some of the leaves, but higher yields they've ever experienced, uniformity, obviously all those things that we, frankly, Pete, a lot of times we attribute to winter wheat advantages out here. We're transferred to this ultra early wheat system. And that's the point I was going to make also, is like, you almost have to change the mindset a little bit to a winter wheat system, even though you're not planting in the fall, because there are those things around earlier weed management, like Ray says. And apparently I'm in the wrong city, because Ray says he's got a stack of beer on his fridge like the last time I visited him, but he's in Calgary, I'm in Lethbridge, so much for that. But anyway, it's this hybrid between the two. And I think what we've done is sort of placed a concept to everybody, but there's a lot of innovations that could follow. And the variety thing is kind of interesting, because we, in that video clip you saw, that we're not seeing any differences with cold tolerance, because I think if we did what they do in that project Pete was part of, it, frost seeding in Ontario, cold tolerance would probably express itself, but it's not when you plant it in, basically late winter here. So, you're probably gonna see the development of new wheat genetics that are going to be called something like a flex wheat, where it's sort of a winter wheat, but it's also a spring wheat. And that would be something that would be ideal for and tailored for a system like this.
Michael has a good question here. At what depth are you taking your soil temp? Pete?
So actually, you better throw that to Brian, because we ignore soil temperature. We're actually seeding in the frost. So,
yeah.
It's -7 and we've got just a skiff of frost, or -5, and we'll go drill at that point. So I don't know, Brian, what depth?
We go down, we go as soon as we hit 0 at 2 inches. that's when we go. And what we found, there's a tiny bit of risk with 0, but more and more, the risk isn't as bad as I thought there either. But we're saying 2 degrees would be your trigger at 2 inches. Somebody was asking about seeding depth. We did compare seeding at 1 inch to 2 inches, and found you get a little bit more system stability at 1 inch versus 2. And yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Ray, I noticed this too. Pete's got a jacket on. It's a real. He does this. This is like his 3rd time, Ray. I'm serious. This is a total power play on his part. I'm wearing a t-shirt. Brian's wearing a nice hockey jacket, and Pete's all dressed
Under
up.
Armour shirt. Shout out to the U16 AA Hurricanes that my kid plays on, and that I'm fortunate enough to be on the coaching staff with. So
There you go.
I didn't get the suit jacket memo.
No, well,
No. So you wear the suit jacket, because if I was doing this in a normal setting, presenting to an audience, I generally try to look, and besides which, somebody has to show Shaun Haney up. And that's my goal, baby, is to show Shaun Haney up. So Ray, that's why I have the jacket on, 100%.
Okay, hey Pete, we're going to show a frost seeding video here in a second, but Ryan has a question here. Have some growers interested in frost seeding forages into winter wheat or winter barley to get a hay crop established. Any experience with this and optimum timing?
Yeah, 100%. So Ryan, I know you're in Prince Edward Island, and thanks for the listening and the question. The real challenge with forages is that they lose their winter hardiness after the unifoliate stage. So we have had situations where we would go out and frost seed those forages in February, late February, or early March. And then if you get a nice warm March, they germinate, they come up, they get to that first trifoliate stage. You get to Easter, whether that's kind of early to mid-April, and you get one night that drops down to about -6 or -8, and they're dead. And you start over again. And that's not the same as with cereals. As Brian said, it can go nasty after you plant those cereals. And because the growing point's in the ground, and Brian, I 100% agree with you. When we frost seed, we are just trying to get the seed an inch deep. We don't need to go deeper than that. But you want a little bit of soil if you can, just to protect it. If you get some of those really cold nights, protect the growing point. And so it's below ground. That's the difference between trying to frost seed forages. So in Prince Edward Island, maybe you wouldn't get those really cold nights. Maybe the ocean is moderating you enough, but there's a risk there because they lose their frost tolerance.
Okay, hold on here. There's another. Jim has a really good question. This is Jim Hale from Saskatchewan. How do other cereal types compare to a regular spring wheat? Brian, what do you think about that?
Well, we're hoping to do more research on that, and I think we're going to get the opportunity to explore it in Durham next. And so the question is, I don't think we fully understand that. We have some ideas, and so our context right now is CWRS or bread wheat, and so the others that are a little bit, have a little bit higher propensity of sprouting, is that going to be an advantage or a disadvantage? And how do they interact with the seed treatment? Because the big thing, like we talked about in that video, was it's super important to have that neonic component as part of a really solid seed treatment package. There are some triple fungicides like Raxil Pro that do a really good job as well. And they too change the compound such that you get better frost tolerance in your germinating wheat seed and seedling. But you just want to do as much as you can to give it the right start that it needs. So high seeding rate, seed treatment. And we would assume that Durham wouldn't be a whole lot different. CPS, not a whole lot different, but both might have a tendency to sprout a little bit quicker. I don't know. That's why we want to, we want to take this concept and not just wheat, but even what would canola do? What would something else do? And then And then after that, it's like, well, okay, now do I actually have the right design of a cropping system and my sequences in place? Even that I think would need to get explored eventually.
A lot of people asking about. Sorry, go ahead, Pete. No, Pete.
Yeah, no, I wanted to add to that, because when we did our research, we did spring wheat, hard red spring wheat. We also did barley, and we did oats, and it was really interesting because we did them all at the same time in the same plots. The wheat would give us up to a 40% yield increase. The oats would only give us about a 21% yield increase, and the barley about 17% yield increase. And always in our recommendations, if you got late seeding, we would always say barley handles heat stress better. And part of that is because it's shorter season, so it heads more quickly. But we would always push towards barley. In our data, man, all those cereal types, it didn't matter. I can't remember now. It was at least a 4 or a 5 year study. They all tolerated frost seeding, that ultra early seeding that Brian's talking about, really, really well. Now, we did not do durum, although I have had growers in southern Saskatchewan that have tried durum because they said, well, if it works for hard red spring, let's give it a go. And they did not have any issue. That worked fine with durum. So I don't know. We don't have research on durum, but if it's a spring cereal, give it, man. Just absolutely give it.
Well, we know that like winter barley doesn't have the tolerance or the to make it through the winter. But so Fuzzbee has a yes. How is barley coming to compare to wheat? Sorry, always told barley can't take the cold. Is that true early in the season, Brian?
Well, it sounds like Pete might have better context than I on that one, because we're sort of still in that context of wheat. So what did?
Well, but doesn't the coldness of the winter have an impact here, Pete? Because in Ontario, they're just milder winter.
Oh yeah, here we go again. Oh, you guys in the banana belt, you guys in Ontario.
They close the Toronto airport when it's only like -5.
So you know why we did the frost seeding trials that we did, Shaun? Because Dwayne Falk grew up in Montana, and Dwayne said that you don't hear barley seeded in February, you don't seed barley. And so it was kind of that concept when I was talking to him, and we knew the benefit of seeding early. So we had no-till drills that could punch it through the frost. And so, man, if it works for barley in Montana, why wouldn't it work for everything? Yeah. I don't know. In our trials, absolutely, barley took it just as well as the wheat crop did. And maybe it's not quite as frost tolerant, but it takes a lot of cold to take barley out.
I really think, Rum Dog, you're trying to really get me going here tonight. There's a few questions in here that I know are trying to get Pete going. But let's not bring up the Packers. I'm a huge Bears fan, and whatever. Go Packers, I guess.
Leave Rum Dog alone. Those Packers, they're going to go all the way.
Oh, this is not good. This is not good. Okay, we're going to set up our next clip. We've been talking a little bit about frost seeding. This is something that Pete's done a lot of work on in Ontario. As he mentioned, they do see huge yield bumps in the case of spring wheat, 40%. This video is a little bit nostalgic in the sense that it is from 2010. It is actually when Pete and I first met. So this is like the first time that the two of us were together, and look where we are here today. You'll also notice that one of us, actually probably both of us, had a little bit more. Well, I'm not even in the video. So what do I'm not going to shoot down myself. I had more hair, but you will definitely notice Johnson. Okay, let's watch the video on frost seeding. Here we go. This is from 2010. Notice the high quality video.
So the big advantage of frost seeding is more yield, and that just has to really resonate with growers. In the data that we've worked on, and we've been working now on frost seeding for about 10 years, we get up to 40% increase in yield with spring wheat. And on average, we're running around a 25% yield increase. So just tremendous increased yield potential. You also get better weed control with frost seeding because the canopy will compete better. You tend to get less disease with frost seeding because often rust is part of free trade with the United States. It blows up on the trade winds, And so your earlier seeding, the rust doesn't get there as early, so we have less disease problems, just a whole range of things from that standpoint that are benefits. But the big push absolutely is more yield.
So if I'm going to consider frost seeding this year, what are some of the, sounds like there's some real advantages with the yield increase of 40%, but what are some of the challenges or some of the real risks or things I need to be thinking about?
Yeah, so the big challenges are the weather conditions still with that 40% yield. So yes, you need the upper end of seeding rate range, but you don't need to go above that.
So, and finally, the thing that I would think would be a given, if we're going to seed that early into the frost, we should be using a seed treatment, right?
Yeah, no question. In fact, I've had some organic producers and some producers in Quebec that grow the 1 year pesticide-free grain. It's kind of a special niche market. If you're planting seed that is untreated into those hostile environments, then all bets are off. I really think, well, it's essential. I just will not recommend it if you're not going to use a seed treatment.
Pete, that is great.
Yeah, I love all the comments.
I can put them up again. Do you want me to put them up again? I like Shaun Schill's a young Peter Johnson.
Oh yeah, I was even younger than that at one point. It's not that long ago.
Well, it's Jim Hale says he looks a little bit like Alex Trebek, a little bit. Yeah, good stuff. Hey, that's a lot of fun. I remember that day very, very well. Okay, so frost seeding. What are the conditions, Pete, that we need to get out there and try frost seeding in the East?
Yeah, and so you need a skiff of frost, and so if it's frozen solid, because sometimes we get that here in Ontario. Not every year. If we get snow first, we don't get that 6, 8, 12 inches of frost, but the frost has to all come out. And I call it maple syrup weather. When we get those warm days and the ground is totally thawed out and you get that cold night, and it's got to go at least to -3, and depending on the equipment, maybe -5 before you can start to run. And it's a bit, you got to be a bit of a nighthawk to do it, because you sort of sit at the edge of the field, and our weather forecasters are so good that they'll forecast -7 and it won't go past -1, and you sit at the edge of the field all night waiting to go, and you never get that chance. But you just need enough frost to carry the equipment, and the drill has to have enough potential, enough down pressure that it can punch through that frost. And as long as you can punch through the frost, then you put the seed in the ground. Don't worry about closing the slot. When the frost comes out, it'll close the slot for you. And that system we have had excellent luck with.
Okay, so Michael asked the question, does a seeder opener make a difference? Example, 3/4 in opener versus 4-inch paired row. Is more black ground better?
So so
go ahead.
My answer is that if I'm frost seeding, it's really tough to frost seed with a hoe drill, just by the very nature of the beast. If you're going to frost seed, I really think that you're probably locked into a disc drill. But I think in Brian's situation, and Brian, jump in here, but I don't know that it matters a whole lot. The black ground, if you had more black ground and you get some sunshine, it's definitely going to warm that ground up a little bit more so that the crop comes up a little bit quicker. But I think either are going to work, because it's just cold that time of year.
Brian, do you have any thoughts on that, like on drill type?
Yeah, we're running a study right now comparing disc to hoe. And so the hoe you saw in that video was, I guess it would be the John Deere, what is it, 1860 now, whatever they renamed the Conservapac knife opener. So that's a pretty aggressive knife opener, and it worked just fine. But we were interested too, because we have about 20 site years of data now, and there was one site year here in Lethbridge where we went in at 0 with that hoe type, and we ripped up pretty good aggregates of soil. But so far with the disc versus the hoe, no difference.
Okay. Ellen points out a skiff of frost is a very technical term. Pete, that's really, really good.
So it's pretty simple. You sit at the side of the field and you just nose the tractor into the field. And if the front wheels of the tractor break through the frost, it's not enough of a skiff. And if the front wheels of the tractor ride on the frost, then give it, baby, just give it.
So we talked about depth, we talked about temperature. Doug brings up an interesting one here. What about seeding speed? How is that impacted based on being out there early? Pete, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think if the ground is actually thought out, then I don't know why you wouldn't seed it at just the normal speed rather. I know Brian in his research trials is probably never going very fast because they're short runs and you're not doing the 8 mile an hour job that you probably shouldn't go that fast anyway. But we never had any issue with speed at all. When we did frost seeding trials, we were running 5 mile an hour, just like we would on dry soil, 5.5 maybe. So yeah, I don't think it makes a difference.
Brian?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I can't see it making a big difference, and the risk posed when it's perfect compared to 0 or 2 degrees is no different. I mean, if you're gonna take a risk and go at 8 miles an hour, don't blame it on the soil temperature is all I'm gonna say.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. Look at the way I went out there and did this. It was early. I said that wouldn't work. Here, Pete, here's somebody that will jump your blood pressure. I often wonder why we use discs as openers instead of hoe drills here in Ontario.
Oh yeah.
I actually
saw that one earlier.
I think that was a plant. If you ask me,
Yeah,
absolutely. That seems like a plant. But
too funny.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
So the big difference, right, is with a hoe drill, you simply can't get the gauge wheel right beside where you put that crop in the ground. Why do corn planters give such good seed depth accuracy and get much more uniform stands? Because they have 2 gauge wheels each side of the double disc openers, and they're walking tandems. So they do this, and if you set for 1.5 inches or 2 inches or 2.5 inches, you're within 1/4 of an inch most of the time with every seed. A hoe drill, and they've gotten better. They're parallel linkage. They've got gauge wheels on some of them, front and back, that walk, but you still just can't get that seeding depth accuracy. So that's the real difference between a disc and a hoe drill. And I know in Western Canada, the guys tell me that discs don't work because your conditions are too wet and you hairpin too much residue. And so fair enough, but don't try frost seeding with a hoe drill. I think that's called a wrecked piece of equipment.
This is the softest I have ever seen you talk about disc drills versus hoe drills. This is like, I'm impressed.
Oh,
you kept it together. Hey, now we talked about the difference between spring wheat, durum, barley. Brian, you mentioned canola. Jim brings up peas or lentils. What are some of the things we need to think about when we start to expand outside of cereals here, Brian?
Well, I think this is why you need some experimentation because, I don't know how many people have ventured out to do that. I just got an email today from a grower in Acadia Valley trying to think about adopting this strategy, but then he's like, well, am I going to go with durum or am I going to try the peas? What do you think? And as a scientist, my inference space is bounded by what I've learned through the hypothesis in which I tested. So you have to be careful. Like this is the situation. Now I'm going to sound like a hypocrite where I'd say, don't plant at all. Like give it a try maybe. But I also understand if you're going to gear up, you're not going to just give it a try. You're going to it's go time then. So I honestly don't know. My feeling is, Pete probably knows better than me, but my feeling is there's probably a bit more risk posed with pulses.
Pete, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So start with cereals, and it really comes down to where is the growing point when that weather turns against you. So you take a lentil or a pea or a soybean or even canola, and I know they're fairly frost tolerant, but you plant them on the 20th of March and they emerge, and then you get that weather Brian talked about earlier where it goes down to -11 and he thought he was done on the ultra early seeding. Well, lentils and soybeans and canola, all of those, the growing point is above ground. As soon as that plant emerges, the growing point is above ground and air temperature fries you. So you get that really cold night, you're at much, much higher risk. With the cereal, just the way that it grows, it's that growing point is still 3/4 of an inch to an inch in the ground. And so you get that layer of protection and it makes a huge difference. So we had some growers actually tried it with canola, and canola did not respond like cereals at all. So Brian, do the research for sure. We always need the research to back it up. But if you're going to try it, Jim, you try it first with your cereal crops. And the beauty of doing the cereal crops early is that then when it's the 1st of May and you should be seeding the peas and the lentils and the canola, most of your cereal crops in the ground, so you don't have to spend time seeding it. Your equipment is now ready to go at the lentils and the peas, and you still get them in earlier than you would have otherwise.
Canola scares me. Like that's the one where, man alive, that's the one where I would probably show the most caution. I think there is just so much that can go wrong with temperature. You think about southern Alberta and the wind and the cotyledon getting thrown. Like it just, that's the one. I would really want to try some test strips and really see how it. And it also, I guess, when I think about canola too, and this is me pretending to be an agronomist, so there's my disclaimer. When is it probably, the biggest advantage with canola is am I beating the heat at flowering time? I think that that's what you're really trying to achieve in that case. So when is the biggest heat going to come? That's that will probably dictate how that sort of works out. But Brian, variety. You mentioned Stettler. Did you how much does variety inside of a crop type make a difference here?
Well, right now, it doesn't. Now it might. I'm back to if you were gonna adopt more of a dormant seeded or frost seeded approach, it might, because that's when your genetics around cold tolerance would probably pay for themselves. The reason we didn't do any dormant or frost seeding yet is because, as you know, I'm a winter wheat agronomist as well, and we're trying to get, if you're interested in a fall system, and winter wheat, there's the acreage is just schizophrenic. It's like, plant winter wheat first. And then if that window passes you by, here's an ultra early seeding system. But I do think, there's a real opportunity to optimize the system with tailored genetics.
Interesting. Pete, what do you think about that in terms of variety differences inside of a crop type?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think it's cool. And when we first did this, we did a bunch of spring wheat that we seeded, actually barley and oats as well, that we seeded in December just to see. And once in a while, one of those varieties would actually make it through till spring. It rarely had more than 50% winter survival, and because of that, we sort of dropped it. It just wasn't consistent enough. But I think Brian's right. I mean, we've always looked for a non-vernalized type winter wheat, so that when we plant winter wheat and we get those killed out areas, we'd like to be able to go in and seed the same variety or seed the same wheat type that would mature, not so much different as where we get right now. And I think that's possible in the foreseeable future. We're not quite there yet, but there are differences. And yeah, I get questions all the time from different people who listen to these talks and say, well, what about dormant seeding? What about going out with my spring wheat on November the 3rd when it's just freezing up? And can I do that? And will it work? And I think the answer is potentially yes. We just haven't done enough work to figure out, does it take a different variety, or what are the parameters that make that work?
Yeah, Brian, we've seen a lot of cases on the prairies where, it's dry now, and it can unfortunately stay this way, but we've seen those years where May is the big snowstorm, right? That's where we get that big, heavy, wet snow and a big bulk of moisture. You'd really be lining, if you're fortunate enough to get that and you've got the cereals in early, boy, you're really home. You're really getting I want to say you're home free, but boy, that's a real win on the scorecard if you can get that to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing that we noticed, like we experienced, I think, the range of extreme conditions you're going to, which is good. It was a bit nerve wracking, but that was good. And the system stood up to that. And on top of that, if you had waited and planted at warmer soil temperatures like we're told to, you would have suffered a yield drag, just like Peter and their team did in Ontario with frost seeding. So it's like those advantages you have with winter wheat, right? You've spread out your workload. You've better synchronized your wheat system to the environmental realities around you. And we're not the only ones that are doing this. I mean, Australia is doing it too, just for different reasons. They're trying to sync to water availability now because it's different than it used to be.
Pete, we haven't really mentioned corn and soybeans that much here. Are those just sort of not crops that really apply to this situation? Does it go back to the growing point, or talk about that?
Yeah, so for sure. We've been really surprised at how soybeans will take early seeding. Now, be careful. If you're listening from Manitoba, I think we're getting too far outside the zone. So Michigan has done a bunch of work, and they've seeded soybeans the last of March, the first part of April. And Michigan is essentially the same as Ontario, so it's not like they're way out, but they haven't seen a yield gain. And the surprising thing is that they generally got a stand and it survived. Remember that once soybeans come above the ground, they can stand about a -2 Celsius frost. Well, if you're in Manitoba, I think the chances of getting a late frost that goes below -2 gets to be pretty high. Here in southern Michigan, I think that risk is quite lower. And so even in Ontario, I think it depends on where you live in Ontario, how you might get away with that. But we've been surprised that soybeans, you almost don't look at the temperature gauge when you plant soybeans. If the ground is fit and it's late April, early May, you just go drill. Corn, you just, what a I don't know, a princess crop, or just I can't think of the right word, but dang, if you seed corn into really cold soils and it stays cold long enough, the soybeans actually seem to take it better. And I never would have thought that, but that's what we saw in the spring of 2020. Corn had reduced stands. Instead of having 32, 34, we had 24 to 26,000 final. And maybe it's because corn doesn't compensate as well, but the soybeans planted in that same window actually did better. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, Laura, a delicate flower of a crop. That's corn.
To it. I was just going to put it up here. Yeah, a delicate flower of a crop. I like that. So, and we talk with corn, we talk so much about the soil being fit and having the perfect condition and setting yourself up to success. It seems to be a little bit counter to I'm going to get this in because I can, right, Pete? That's kind of, it's sort of counter to what we're talking about.
No, that's right. And we'd like to plant cereals in the perfect soil conditions as well, but because cereals are a base zero crop, they generally will germinate wheat about 2 Celsius, give or take. Maybe it needs 2.5 or 3, but because they'll germinate at such low temperatures, and because wheat in particular doesn't even need to be into moisture, right? As long as there's humidity there, it will pick up the humidity and germinate. And if you don't believe me, just think about wheat that germinates on the head, because if you leave it there long enough, that will happen. It's much more responsive to that early seeding and seems to need the perfect soil conditions less, whereas corn, Yeah, it's just a delicate flower of a crop.
I like that. Brian, Brad has a question here watching on YouTube. Urea or ESN if you're thinking about this strategy?
Well, two things. Where if you're single shooting, and you want to put a lot down, I would say ESN is perfect. We've done a ton of research on that. Single shoot systems. Ray helped us out a lot with that back in the day, setting some of those experiments up. We also showed that if you're going to band it, though, just band it 1-to-1 with regular uncoated urea, because you're going to get the same yield result you would with 100% ESN. So that a little bit word to the wise there.
Pete, any comment on that?
Yeah, no, I think, see here, we would broadcast the urea after the wheat comes up, as opposed to put it all on with the drill. You start trying to put a lot on with the drill, and Brian's 100% right. All urea, you're going to burn the daylights out of it, and you're not going to have a crop. So then you have to go to at least some ESN, and that depends on how many pounds of nitrogen are you putting on, and your seed bed utilization, how good you can spread it out from that standpoint.
I would think, Brian, too, because we're, in the case of the prairies right now, dry, so it affords us the ability to think about this strategy. It's not super wet. So we need to be prepared possibly in season, depending on how things are going from a moisture perspective. You think back to 2 years ago, we got all that rain in June at the very end to kind of save the crop. We need to be prepared in crop to maybe put some more fertilizer down, correct?
Yeah, and we've done a fair bit of research on that as well as others, and I think a lot of times it boils down to what's your comfort zone as a producer in terms of what you're buying, how you handle it at planting. But for sure, at a minimum, in crop application strategies compared to all at planting will at least give you the same yield, if not better. So going in and top dressing with either uncoated urea or some of those enhanced efficiency fertilizers like Super U and Agritane, they've shown really good results, particularly in winter wheat systems, but spring wheat also.
Okay. There was a couple questions earlier. I want to kind of hit back to it because I think it's one of the ones that's top of mind in this category is depth. So, Pete, if I am going to, whether I'm in Western Canada or Eastern Canada, talk about seed depth.
Yeah, so for us, we always have enough moisture, and so an inch is ample. Don't go more than an inch and a half for sure, because all that does is it slows the wheat or the barley or the oats, whatever you're doing. It just slows the emergence. And we talk lots about planting date, but it's not only planting date, but it's actually when the crop emerges that really is probably more important. So keep it shallow. I don't see any benefit whatsoever to going deep unless there's no moisture. And so the beauty of doing it ultra early is that there should always be moisture there. And I don't know, just keep it shallow. I just think you keep it shallow, probably not less than 3/4 of an inch, because then you get into maybe some root issues, but shallow.
Pete, what year was it in Ontario? I remember being there in the spring where the wheat just got smoked. Like it was black. And it came back and we had a fantastic crop. Was that like 2011, 2012?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was 2012, because 2012 was the super warm spring, and we were out there. We actually planted corn and soybeans late March, and then we got an incredible cold snap early May. It took out all of the apple blossoms. We had almost no apple crop. And I spent so much time driving around looking at the wheat heads inside the plant, trying to see if they'd gone off color. Nope, we had an amazing wheat crop. So, yeah, it can take quite a bit. It's not that you can't get frost damage, but...
Yeah, but it speaks to why this strategy can work, right? There's some resiliency in the wheat crop. Brian, any final thoughts for growers that are considering early or ultra early seeding?
Well, just that, we've done our homework. We know it works. We we know that the prescriptive strategy of using soil temperature as your trigger is gonna minimize, if not eliminate, the risk associated with just haphazardly going in when you think you should. So, if you're right at 2 or just a little bit before, you're good to go. But the other comment I would say about, the importance of the seed treatments, I may have missed that in saying it's not about biotic resistance to anything. Of course, you need that in cold soils, and if you have potentially soil-borne insects and pathogens, but we know that seed treatment is going to buffer you against those abiotic threats around cold and cold ambient temperatures. So it's super important to use that to your advantage. So be prepared, but be ready.
Pete, any final thoughts?
Yeah, so a couple of things actually, which have always astounded me, but I do have organic growers now planting untreated seed in frost seed situations, and I don't like it, but they say they get better weed control, and they're upping their seeding rate, and they're making it work. So I agree with Brian, and unless you're an organic grower, for goodness sakes, use a seed treatment, because it's such a harsh environment. But the other thing I would say is don't shave your seeding rate. You're putting into a hostile environment. You don't need to double your seeding rate. We've done a bunch of that work, but don't shave it. Keep it at the upper end. For us on spring wheat, we're 1.2 to 1.6 million. And we would say always, if you're frost seeding, if you're ultra early, at the 1.6 million, because you're going to get more plants that don't make it. That's just the way it is.
Same out west, Brian.
Yeah, like at least 400 seeds per square meter or 40 seeds per square foot. That'll give you more main stems, per unit area, and eliminates or limits your tillering, which is important for uniformity and gives you better yield. And the final comment on the seed treatments, in all of our research on it, you get significantly more plants in the field. So,
yeah.
And of course that'll translate to higher yield just because of the seed treatment.
I'll tell you what, by the time my career's over, I want us to all be working on the same units. We got seeds per acre. We got like plants per square foot per meter. Like, I can't wait. That is I will get that done before my career is over. Maybe.
I thought it was just the Americans that did the seeds per acre. But,
no.
Pete surprised me.
Yeah, they're just see. Sometimes they talk in Fahrenheit too. It's like really odd.
What's Fahrenheit? And by the way, Shaun, it's nobody mentioned pounds per acre of seed. So we've come such a long way from when I started, because it used to be, we seed 2 bushels or 2.5 bushels per acre, and then it was 150 pounds. What does that mean? Give me a break.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, Brian, thanks a lot for your time tonight. Great insight, great research. Keep up the great work there at Lethbridge Research Station.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, Pete, as always, great to chat with you, throw a little bit of some shots your way, and have some good laughs and great info at the same time. Appreciate it.
No, thanks, Shaun. Anytime, man.
Okay, everybody, thanks a lot for watching here tonight. I want to encourage you to go to realagriculture.com/agronomists and sign up for our agronomist email. As well, you can find the archive. If you missed some of tonight's show, you can go to the archive and find it at realagriculture.com/agronomists. Okay, so you got that. And like I said, sign up for our newsletter, and we will make sure to prompt you when those credits are ready for you CCAs out there. We'll be back again next week on the Agronomists. I really enjoyed tonight's discussion. It was a lot of fun, very informative. Check your temperature tomorrow. It may be time to put some seed in the ground. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with the Agronomists, and we'll chat again next week. Cheers, everybody.